TV umpire to director, we have a player review. Can we rock and roll, please?
Hello and welcome to Bits and Pieces, the podcast that's as useless as the music that plays after a boundary in South Africa. It's supposedly meant for the spectators, of which there are three. It can't exist without the cricket that goes on. But the people who play it seem to enjoy it. So here we are, back with the friendliest podcast for yet another episode. I am Tony and I'm joined by the regular hosts of Bits and Pieces this time, because this is supposed to be the week for comebacks. India didn't manage to do it. So we've brought back your favorite panel, of which let me just get started with the intros. You won't hear him talk about cricket, even if you subscribe to the most premium version of the Ken or follow his verified Twitter handle. But for us, he'll let the mask slip. Say hi, PGK.
Hi, Tony. Let me just say that the whole country is against all five of us, but we can continue.
Starting with the siege mentality. Let's go for it.
This podcast could also have been titled Angry Men Shouting into STEM Mics, but someone else stole our thunder. The second friend of mine who's joining us, his insights are like the Cullinan diamond. But his anecdotes include moving around water bottles to annoy Daryl Cullinan. Say hi to Nitin Sundar.
Hey, dude, you made fun of the music in the broadcast. Like, what are you insinuating anything against Super Sport? Find other ways to make your podcast go viral, mate.
Welcome. Also joining us, he famously never watches the IPL, but from his academic background, he once suggested a scheduling format for the IPL to make it better, at which BCCI looked at him and said, hey, you think we want to make the game better? Go away, da. Welcome, Mohan.
Yep, absolutely. So this is thanks Tony, thanks PGK and Nitin. Yeah, nice to be here once again. I want to remind you that at the end of last week's podcast, I did say that South Africa would win. I had them at 55 to 45. I'm not telling you I told you so, but I am telling you that.
Well done. Okay, and rounding up the panel of hosts this week, he's also a producer for the day. Original fans know him as Reverse Sweep or Pius. He's known for his voice that makes people weep, but he's one of the peeps here. Srinath, I'm sure you have a better intro for yourself and for the show, and I'm going to put you on the spot and come up with an alternate intro for Bits and Pieces.
This is producer Peeves saying hello. Bits and Pieces is not just the name of this podcast, but also our collective state of mind right now in the aftermath of everything that's happened in the last 48 hours, including, as we will find out soon, the resignation of an Indian captain.
Yeah. So before we get into the topics at hand, must say thank you to all of the listeners who wrote in with very, very kind words. We didn't expect for there to be so many listeners, especially because we average about 10,000 hours of digital marketing expertise per host in this podcast, and nobody bothered to check if there was another Bits and Pieces podcast. Turns out there are at least another 10,000 of these. So you guys are really here despite our ignorance, but also it puts things into perspective, right? That experts can also go wrong and amateurs can call them out. So here we are to tell cricketers how to do their job, right? So this week, the episode could actually be titled Men Will Do Anything But Go to Therapy. We are here for group hugs. After this was supposed to be sort of the roundup from 2018 when Bumrah made his debut in Cape Town, which kickstarted the revolution that would have seen us winning across Sena countries. It coincidentally ended with Bumrah at Cape Town, but it didn't all go according to script. But I think we have a lot to cover this week. None of this matters because the most important topics for the week are obviously the 5th Ashes test that is happening. India under 19 beating South Africa under 19 in the ongoing World Cup, and Ramiz Raja's proposal for triangular or quadrangular formats to return. We shall not be discussing anything else, guys, so sorry about that. No, so really, let's get into the series roundup from India versus South Africa and jump straight into it.
I like that you mentioned, how this all started in 2018. There is a lot of symmetry with 2018, actually. If you think back to that tour, India technically lost that series on the first morning. Right, they conceded way too many runs and could not catch up in that test match. They would have actually won that test match if they had, kept Australia to fewer runs on that day. And in beautiful symmetry this time, the only day where India actually did well, you could say, on this tour was on the first day. And they ended up winning one test match because they batted well on day one. And that followed 5 shit batting performances. There's no other way to put it. I think we mentioned this the last time. You can't keep winning test cricket if your batsmen are going to consistently draw flops the way India have been doing. And I think it eventually caught up with them.
There is one other symmetry here, and that it's worth pointing out that in that test that you talk about, Nitin, if I remember right, Rahane was dropped or was not included in the team, and there was a huge uproar as a result of that. And perhaps in this series, we might sit back and say, maybe he should have been dropped, and who knows what the outcome of the series would have been.
There's so many people over the last few years saying that all you need to win tests overseas is bowlers who can take 20 wickets. And then Rahane and Pujara just went to sleep on the basis of that, saying, we've got the bowlers, why do we need to make runs? And the places have been pretty much glued to the middle order forever. And no one seems to be wanting to come out to the media and say that they're out of form or they're in the middle of a patch, because this is, like you said, Mohan, this is a long way from what it was in 2018, because they just said horses for courses, Ajinkya Rahane is dropped. We just picked somebody best 11 for the test and so on. Now it's just like these guys have an infinitely long rope. So you just come a whole circle from that time.
And I think the thing to say here is that we've been bloody minded in everything, including the treatment of our captain and coach. If we've been bloody minded in everything other than the selection of the team. And anger that you're detecting in what I'm saying, hell yeah.
Everyone is angry. So I'm going to give, since we are talking about parallels to 2018, I'm going to give a parallel to 2018 as well. It's a parallel that you probably haven't heard of, but here it is. Let me just read this out. I found this a few days back. I found it really interesting. So I'm just going to read this out. This is from a story that appeared in Cricinfo in April 2018. And funnily, it has nothing to do with cricketers. Here it goes. Opening paragraph. Armed robbers raided Newlands on Friday, smashing the glass doors of multiple suites at the Cape Town Stadium and making away with TVs, liquor, and other items. Okay. The raid began shortly after midnight. Okay. When a woman approached security personnel at gate and asked for directions to a nearby church. She returned 5 minutes later. Only this time she was joined by 3 accomplices who jumped the fences, apart from more than 15 other men, some of whom had guns. So they forced them to give them keys to the presidential suite. They stole stuff, and the South African police is doing an extensive investigation. When I read this now, I was thinking 15 people went to Cape Town in armed, with masks, all men, and just broke the whole place up. How many people, how big is the squad of India right now?
They did go in masks as well because it's COVID.
Oh, yes.
Every single one of PGK's interludes now sounds like an intro to the Nutcraft, which he writes. This is like, I was wondering, what are you getting to? And then I'm like, down to the 4th paragraph, we know what it is.
And this story says that this is the 3rd time since 2015 that this ground has been hit by robbers. So this is like an annual event. So every year robbers go and just like break into the fortress, just steal stuff and leave.
You know what happened after they caught these guys, right? They were court-martialed, the entire country against 15 men.
Touche.
I think, apart from all of this, there's only one parallel with 2018, which is that you were right about Rahane being dropped. But what you all neglected to mention was who replaced him at that time. And the person who replaced him that time in the team was Rohit Sharma. Correct. And Rohit Sharma came back into the team and he had I think a horrible test match or so. So anyway, the series ended badly for him. It ended like a sort of a redemption for Rahane. And now at the end of the 2021 season, Rohit Sharma is in all likelihood going to be the captain of the Indian cricket team. Rahane is out. So the whole thing comes back.
Bringing it back to the cricket and also the symmetry, these were two very evenly matched teams, right? So in their bowling attack, they had Kagiso Rabada, we had Bumrah. They had a world-class spinner in Maharaj, and we had Ashwin kind of to match up to that. Olivier was useless. Umesh was equally useless. And then they brought in Ingidi with a thick backside, and we had Shardul to match up to that, right? And both of them, whenever they bowl, you don't know whether to say it's a peach of a delivery or a delivery of a peach. So these were two evenly matched sides, fully symmetrical. what went wrong, guys? What, in your estimation, as amateur podcasters, why did we lose the series?
On at the start of the final day, right? It sort of you had, and we'll talk about what happened, the previous evening in a bit. But at the start of the final day, because this was this Indian attack, right? You still thought that they could make some magic happen, right? And if you look at the way Bumrah and Shami started on the last morning, I was keeping count. There were about 6 wicket-taking balls that they bowled in the first 15 minutes, right? In a parallel universe somewhere, those balls were getting edged. They were getting caught and not dropped. The way Pujara dropped one of the catches that came India's way. And India actually went on to win that match, right? And all of us would then have gone back into adding another glorious chapter into India's fast bowling story, right? In a sense, that would have papered over the cracks. It would have papered over the fact that India should have never been in this position to begin with, right? They just did not have enough runs. But it's just one of those things, right? We now see control percentage is something people talk about all the time, and they use it post facto to explain why some batsmen do well, some bowlers don't do well, so on and so forth. South Africa were immensely lucky on that final day, right? And there were some brutes of deliveries that the Indian bowlers were bowling. And it's just one of those things. Like you said, two very evenly matched teams. The margins of difference between the two are very, very minimal. And India needed one session to go their way. On the last day, it didn't happen.
So we've used the word evenly matched teams, or the phrase evenly matched teams, about 3 times in this podcast so far. This is post fact rationalization. I think right up until the last day of the last test, we were saying India is going to win this. So, and suddenly now we're saying evenly matched, because the results show that they were indeed evenly matched, although South Africa didn't have arguably their lead bowler. Or one of their lead bowlers. But I think if we want to sit back and say what went wrong, and that's the question that Tony posed, I think we're in the same position that Australia was this time last year. Australia was scratching their head saying, how did we lose this? We should never have lost this. How did we lose this? And I don't think they found adequate answers, even after lots of soul searching. I suspect we will be in a very similar position. I don't think there are any clear answers as to why we lost this. It's not, we weren't evenly matched. We were going into the series as with South Africa being, if not serious underdogs, they were underdogs, even though they were playing at home. So we were left with a situation where we're scratching our heads saying, how the hell did we lose that? And then the collateral damage that's happened as a result of that is we lose a captain and a team apparently or seemingly in disarray. But we may have got the result that we actually wanted, at least Nitin wanted, which is to cleanse the team of the 2 people that may have caused it. So that's all he can do. At the end of the day, that's all he can do.
No, in addition to not having the runs, 212 it's not a significant target. I think it was like 60 for 1 when that whole stump mic incident happened and the DRS call happened. Elgar came out in the press conference and said they actually played into our hands because they're probably too desperate to win. They were irked by something that was a decision. We come to that. It's a technology based call that irked not just the captain this time. Usually there's a counteracting force that the bowlers get on with it. This time it was Ashwin, it was KL Rahul, who's second in command, all of them going after the broadcaster together for an extended period of time. It was 30 minutes, I think. And the next 3 overs cost about, I think it was 26 or 28 runs after that incident. And when you've got 212 to chase, a lapse like that is absolutely unaffordable, right? You can come back all you want on the day after and so on. Bumrah is probably the only one who kept his focus throughout that phase. And none of these things help. If you have a world-class bowling attack, you're basically counteracting that by going after the broadcaster and doing silly things like that.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to the broadcaster point later. Let's finish the...
So I'll just say that I think all of this is true. But if you look at the series as a whole, everyone always says that bowlers win your test matches, and that's true, but it is bowlers win your test matches with an asterisk mark on it, because I think that the way how bowlers win your test matches, it depends on the kind of bowlers you have. It depends on the kind of surface you have. It depends on the kind of opposition you have. And South Africa, we know, at least in the last 2 tests, were like extremely bouncy wickets. It is not a coincidence that all of South Africa's bowlers are, 7 feet, 8 feet tall, because it's a form of natural selection in South Africa. In order to succeed as a bowler in South Africa, on South African pitches, you need to be tall. And so the reason why these guys are tall is not an accident. That's what home series do. It allows you to pull in like people who really understand home conditions and are able to deliver on those conditions. It's like how we get Akshar Patel in India. This is their version of that. So I think that when India's bowlers definitely had a height disadvantage, which means that South African bowlers then had to bowl in a certain way, which means that they would get extra bounce from the entire pitch. And so everybody, if you look at all the Indian wickets over the last couple of days, I think 90% of them were caught behind. It was either the wicketkeeper first slip, gully, it goes everywhere over there. India had to attack stumps much more. I think they were the only ones who managed to get some bowled, etc. So but for the kind of bowling that you do, if you have to extract this, and Indian bowlers are tremendously versatile. We've spoken about how they're able to bowl like West Indian bowlers in West Indies. They're able to bowl like Australian bowlers in Australia. They're able to bowl like Indian bowlers in India. But in order to bowl like South African bowlers in South Africa, you need runs on the board to defend. And I think that is the problem. Because if you are attacking the stumps and trying to get South African batsmen out in a certain way, you're going to basically only way you can succeed is if you have runs on the board to defend it. And if you don't have runs on the board, then you can have all the really great bowling that works for you, but somehow in these conditions, absent the height, that's the only thing. So I tend to agree that, especially with Nitin, who said that the first day was the only time where India was really in the game. I don't think the bowling was bad per se. It is just that for the kind of bowling we had, we needed runs to be able to defend it, because that's the only way you would get them out.
Another problem with batting so badly and getting bowled out twice in quick succession so fast is that you're not really getting the advantage of bowling last, right? You repeatedly had India bowling on day 3 in the 4th innings. You're not going to get the uneven bounce that you want out of the pitch at that point in time, right? And it didn't help that the heavy roller came out, etc., etc. So yeah, absolutely agree with that point. I think a lot has been made about the height difference between the two teams. But this was true in, the last time India went to South Africa as well. This was true in 2010 when India played superbly in South Africa, right? Srinath is not a patch on Morne Morkel, right? If you were to measure their height. And yes, sure, you could have got Ishant Sharma instead of, Umesh Yadav for the final test match. But the reality is, these bowlers do know how to take wickets in all conditions. And it's not like bowling full or, bowling back of a length cannot work in South African conditions. Indian bowlers have done it in the past, but yeah, you need runs on the board to be able to defend them.
To that point, right, couple of things. One is that India saw height was a factor last time, and we all predicted Ishant would be a shoe-in for Siraj, except they picked Umesh, who had a really off test match. But to that point, I think great credit to Ishant Sharma, who despite being a journeyman for these many years, was still on the sidelines cheering for the team, right? So we had the tall man advantage in the dugout, but not otherwise. But if you look at the runs that were scored, right? So I just took a quick look at the stats of all the Indian batters that have played all 3 tests. None of them average above 40, right? South Africa had 3 of them. Actually, surprisingly, I don't think you'll guess who has the highest average for South Africa by a huge margin. It's not Elgar or Peterson. It's actually Bauma, who has an average of 73 because he got those 2 not outs. But Peterson and Elgar average 46 and 47 respectively. For India, I think out of the batters who played all 3 tests, Pant has 37 off the back of that 100 not out. But otherwise, if you look at the stats as a whole, Vihari has 60 with 1 not out, and Kohli has actually 40, though he missed a test match in between. So very clearly, I think if your top 3 or 4 is not giving you runs, and that bears out in the results as well.
In fact, did South Africa have any 100 in this series?
No.
India
had
just
2.
2.
Rahul and Pant.
And that tells you exactly where the problem is, right? Like if you got 2 centuries out of your batsman in 6 innings and still you were so short of runs, it just shows.
Yeah, and the 2 centuries are the person literally at the top of the order and literally at the bottom of the batting line.
But I have a question here, right? All of these results aside, is Virat Kohli back? I mean, we saw 2 bloody-minded innings, both above 140 balls for different number of runs. But to my mind, Kohli and Peterson were polar opposites, right? Peterson was flirting at everything outside the off stump, getting lucky as lucky can be. Kohli was the picture of discipline itself, and he at both points in the first and second innings thought, okay, now is the time to get on with it, get some runs. had a flirt outside the off stump and lost his wicket in both cases, right? Is it just mere luck, or is there some terminal decline associated with Kohli which we'll need to live with for the rest of his career?
I don't think, of course, Kohli and Peterson were what did you say, polar opposites. Kohli and Pant, when batting together, were polar opposites too. So it's not just Peterson. So he was batting with a guy who's middling everything, putting the bad ball away, and actually looking really, really composed. Now, but going back to the question itself, is Kohli back? He is back and he's not, in my view. So it really depends on what happens in the next little while. We'll inevitably need to talk about his resignation as captain and so on at some point in time. I have a feeling that he's completely deflated at the moment, and he's just chucked it all in. So is he back in? Does he have the motivation to continue to play at that highest level, at the kind of pace and intensity that he brings to the game? I do not know. So is Kohli back? Yes, I think he is, from the way he played. Is he back? I don't know. Absolutely have no idea whether, without the intensity and fire that he brings to the park, I don't know if he can ever be in.
I'm actually much more optimistic. I loved the Kohli innings. Like, even though the scores don't show it. Look, whenever people talk about Kohli, always there is this one moron in the comment section or in some Twitter, this thing, who says and compares it with, this is what Tendulkar did when he played that 241, he cut out the cover drive, and Kohli must also stop playing the cover drive. Dude, have you watched that match? Have you gone? If you can, go and see the scorecard of that match. That particular test match, almost, I think, nearly 2,000 runs were scored in that test match alone. Right. All right. So that was the flattest of the flattest pitches with the most average bowlers. And I think Tendulkar just looked at it and said, okay, what can I do here? Okay, I can cut out the cover drive. Can I still make runs? Of course you can make runs. Because, I mean, of course he's being Tendulkar, but also the other thing. I think the fact that Kohli just basically, you can very clearly see his approach has changed. His approach, at least in this series, has been probably biased towards, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to basically stay in here. I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to back myself. It's a very Elgar-esque kind of an approach. It's very probably Pujara, not now Pujara, probably earlier Pujara kind of an approach, where I'm just going to stay in here. I'm going to face as many balls as I can. I'm going to back myself, and I'm going to, when I get the chance, I'll play. Kohli didn't basically take the choice of saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to go for my shots anyway, and sooner or later things will come. But the fact that he was able to stay in for so long and face so many balls and at immense control, it's like how they say when you're batting, right? You put your hands in your pockets, literally, like his hands never come out. It stays exactly where it is. And yeah, maybe the runs don't show it, but the fact that he stuck on for so long and demonstrated so much control, for me, is like a really, really great sign.
PGK, props for using the adjective Elgar-esque. Like the Mut Karunaratne just became one of the fans of our podcast. For people who don't know, Karunaratne once, a couple of years back, when neither Karunaratne nor Elgar were really household names, not that they are now. But a couple of years back in an interview, Karunaratne had mentioned that Dean Elgar is the person who inspires him the most. On Virat Kohli's batting itself, right? I think Virat Kohli comes into every match with a certain amount of discipline, right? And there's only so much you get from Kohli because he's on the edge, right? He's this brash young man from Delhi and all of that. In this test match, given all the history that his batting he's been having trouble, he's not been scoring runs, there's so much happening off field, etc. He said, okay, I'm going to score runs this time. I'm going to put all the discipline I have into my innings, right? And he batted like a monk. Even when he actually got out, it was because he was trying to farm the strike, because all the wickets had fallen and he had to manipulate the strike. If not, I think Kohli would still be batting, right? If this were a timeless test match, Kohli on that pitch would still be batting.
That's in the first innings, yes.
In the first innings, yes. He would be on whatever, 238 of 7,000 balls or whatever. But the effect of putting all that discipline into his batting, right? I think we should talk about what happened on day 4. Was that the most childish passage of play we've all ever seen? I definitely feel I've not seen a team lose its shit the way the Indian team lost its shit for that half. Now, I don't know what the hell was going on. Everyone coming up and having a go at the mic. I mean, I know that former cricketers don't make great commentators, but do we really want current cricketers to become commentators during the game?
Hello, my name is Emma. Did you know that seahorse males give birth, and jellyfish, when you cut them into half, they turn into 2 jellyfish, and when you cut starfish's arm, they turn into they can grow it back. That face looks like an oval. So he's put oval highlights in the show notes. Check it out. If you like this podcast, why don't you share it with your friends? Like I share chocolates with my friend. Bye.
Just before we go to the stump mic stuff, Nitin, you mentioned brash young man from Delhi. I was reminded of Gavaskar calling young Gautam Gambhir until he was 36 and making his sixth comeback into the Indian team. But anyway, before we move on to the stump mic stuff, I think we should talk about Pant and his batting. Last game, he was criticized left, right, center for it. He's just becoming this second innings god in the sense that he doesn't care if it's a number 8 or number 11 batting. If he feels set, he goes for it. Like Keshav Maharaj was brought in to bowl clearly as the spinner to tempt him. Pant didn't care. He was set enough. He knew what his plans were. 2 fielders in the deep on the leg. He just kept hitting and hitting and hitting. And here's the reason why we even have, had a contest at all, and why this podcast is even focusing on flaws of the middle order and so on, as opposed to a 10-wicket defeat and all of us are lying down and, crying about India's decline as a test team. I think Pant's the difference, and we should acknowledge it.
Yeah. So that's the question about Pant, right? Because based on these match-winning innings he's played, and I think it's a relevant stat to mention that there are only 2 wicketkeeper batsmen in the history of cricket to have a century in Australia, South Africa, England, and India. That's Gilchrist and Pant, and that's the end of the list, right? That's amazing. And in the last 1 year alone,
as usual, you're overshadowing Rahul Dravid. He was a wicketkeeper and he scored hundreds in all these countries.
But the other thing about Pant is also that people forget that he has like several 90s as well. And many of those 90s are not out.
Yeah. I mean, both Sydney and Gabba, right? I think it was 97 and 89 not out, which don't count as hundreds either. But here's the question, right? I mean, based on the back of these innings alone, I'm with Gavaskar when we come to that section of the podcast for Pant taking a claim to captaincy. But if you take out this 100 not out, right, over 5 innings, he's averaged 17. Right? Is that a luxury that you can afford if you're going to pack your team with 5 bowlers, if that's the strategy? Would you rather have someone who contributes every time rather than Pant who scores 1 in 10 times?
Tony, there are 2 types of people who watch cricket. There are people who don't care about the stats and make fun of people who go into stats and try to explain everything post facto. I used to be one of them. And then there are the people who actually use stats and use metrics and, try to post facto rationalize. It's very tough to actually predict what's going to happen in cricket, right? Yeah. So you only have these 2 types of people. I would say in the last few days, I've gone from, the first type to the second. So what I did was I went and looked into control percentages and stuff, right? So Rishabh Pant on average plays an out of control shot every 5 balls, right? The generally an elite batsman is at 7 to 8, right? 6, 7, 8 typically. Williamson, I believe, is at 9 and above, whereas Joe Root is at 7 and so on.
Karunaratne is at 21. Yeah, something like
that. So Elgar must be like 40 or something. Yeah. No, actually he's like
Elgar is 0.3. Yeah.
No, the funny thing about that fan following is Karunaratne, people would argue is a far better batsman than Dean Elgar. Right? He's actually accomplished a lot more, but he's like, hey, no, Dean Elgar was the guy, right? But yeah, coming back to this point, right? And then you have someone like Pujara, right, who's known to sort of give very few fall shots, doesn't take a chance unless the ball is in his zone. It all boils down to, it's a risk-reward game at the end of the day, right? Rishabh Pant knows one way to score. He believes that there are so many runs he can score before he gets out, and he plays those shots. Yes, he's going to fail more often than not, right? He is going to play what seems like a crazy shot post facto, like the one he played in the second innings of the second test, and he's going to get pilloried for it. It's going to keep happening in his career. But there are going to be streaks like what happened, this time around, where he's just able to temper himself that little bit. Some of his shots, his false shots don't actually go to hand, and he's going to come away, with a glorious big score, right? It's going to keep happening. It's the same thing that happened with Sehwag as well, right? So yeah, that's my take on Pant's batting.
Well, you just said, Nitin, you just said what I was going to say. Pant to me is a Sehwag, right? How many matches has he in his short career already, if not one single-handedly, contributed majorly to a win? And that really contributes to a lot to this question quite a bit. And it really irritated me, and we should call it out, that at the end of the second test, Gavaskar was absolutely pillorying, and he was not the only one, but everyone in the so-called experts were absolutely lambasting Pant for the shot that he played, and they said that the coach and captain should stick a stump up somewhere And then at the end of the match, it's as if they never said it. They didn't own it at all to say, oh, the rest of the people were really pillorying Pant and so on, but look how he's turned it around. And I think that's where we have, significant problems, not recognizing that this guy comes as a package and he will win matches with the style that he plays. And sometimes he'll do foolish things, and that's fine. And you need a Sehwag in every team. You need a Gilchrist in every team. You need a Pant, I believe, in every team.
The Indian team also understands this. I mean, I actually think a lot of stuff that they say in press conferences and all may just be stuff they say just to like diffuse things. I don't think they seriously go out and try to like change Pant's game. I think they've known for a while that you need one person like this in the batting order. So previously it would be Sehwag who would be right at the top. Now they know that it is Pant at number 6 because there are 5 people above him who play very conservatively in a certain way. I mean, that being said, also, I mean, I know, Nitin, you said about control percentages of Rishabh Pant and how it is, 1 every 4 or 1 every 5. It really didn't seem that way when you were watching the second innings. I mean, it really looked like he was batting on a different pitch. Like the things and the places where he missed the ball and the balls that he really missed were things where you could see he was taking an enormous amount of risks in order to do it. It never looked like at any point in time that he was being beaten. Like I saw how they were bowling to like a Pujara, a Rahane, or even a Mayank. And it didn't look like that at all. It felt like Pant was just making very strong, clear, decisive decisions on this is what I want to do, this is what I don't want to do, and that's about it.
Great second innings partnership, right? That we saw, which basically put us in a position of reasonable strength with the brash young man from Delhi and also Kohli at the other end was very interesting to watch, right? Because Kohli didn't score a run for an extended period of time in that phase. He was done no favors by Pujara and Rahane. And Pant just seemed to, whenever he hit it, except with the tailenders, he seemed to be, in complete control of the shot. There was one shot that he played to Dwayne Olivier, which could have ended with his wicket, but he blasted it so hard through extra cover or mid-off that, you just had to sit up and say, wow, right? A little bit of resulting also happens. But I think with Pant, what we must realize is that these centuries in Sena, they actually span 3 or 4 years, right? His century in Australia is not from this tour, but from 2018, 2019. I think his England century is also from that time period. And this time around, what's actually immensely improved about Pant is his keeping, not just away, but also at home. In the home series as well, he looked like a very, very capable keeper. So there's been like evolution to Pant also. And I think, to be honest, he's a definite fix for the Indian team, probably the first of the 11 that will be picked. The real question that I had earlier was that if you're picking a guy like Pant, then can you afford the luxury to have 5 bowlers if your top level batsmen are not playing the innings that they're supposed to be playing?
Actually, you could leave out everything about Pant and bowlers there. You could just say that, if your top 5 batsmen are not scoring runs, you're not going to do well in Test cricket. Doesn't matter who follows. But completely agree with everything you guys said about Pant, right? It was not a chancy innings at all. What I was trying to explain with control percentages was just the approach that Pant brings to the crease, which means that there will be fluctuations, right? And the whole thing with control percentages also, right? Yeah, I mean, a control percentage of, 1 false shot every 7 balls. If every batsman in the world actually got out to the first false shot he played, every test match would end before tea on the first day, right? That doesn't happen. And that's why it is so tough to predict what will happen in Test cricket. There is so much that happens. The edge needs to, you actually need to nick the ball. The edge needs to carry to a fielder. The fielder needs to be in the right place. The fielder should not drop the ball. So much needs to happen. Right?
Nice to get
umpire should not go for.
And I think the control percentages also don't show the nature of the loss of control. So we would rather probably see Pant swing like, completely crazily, miss the ball completely and it goes to the wicket keeper. And that is an out of control shot, as opposed to a ball to a Mayank or a Pujara where it just whisks past the outer edge and they're all standing there. Okay, it missed.
Which is exactly the risk reward thing, right? You either choose to defend with soft hands, so you're not taking a chance to score a run, and hence the edge may not carry, but you're still out of control if you edge it. or you're swinging for the fences, right? You're going for a powerful cover drive, strong bottom hand, as Gavaskar would say. And if you nick off, then the absence of soft hands, right? And you nick off and you get out, right? So
strong bottom and soft hand.
Since we made that comparison to Sehwag, right, I think every day is a good day to remember just how awesome Sehwag was. Very early in his career, right? I think 2 or 3 years into the Sehwag era, so to speak, there was a different grammar that pundits, commentators used to have while talking about Sehwag. Every time he failed, they would not actually admonish him for his choice of stroke. And there have been at least a couple of times that I can remember where Sehwag has got out cutting the first ball of a test innings to third man, right? Trying to uppercut the first ball and getting caught. I remember at least this happening at least twice. And yet, people would never say that's a bad shot. They'd say that's the way Sehwag plays.
There's another angle to this, right? Like it's also who followed Sehwag. Like you've got an insurance of Dravid, Tendulkar, Lakshman. And that changes the narrative completely. When Pant gets out, you're seeing like a tale of Shami, Bumrah, and someone else also. Right?
I could flip that around, right? You could say that the opener actually has a job to do that because he needs to protect that middle order from everyone else, and he's setting the agenda. Pant, typically batsmen coming in lower down the order, the premium they're expected to place on the wicket is significantly lesser, which is why you had a Gilchrist and you had multiple aggressive batsmen, even a Viv Richards, right, who used to play with a certain flair, which you wouldn't have expected from the top order.
Yeah, even Rohit Sharma gets called out for getting out.
My point is, in general, we don't celebrate enough that we've got the closest thing we've ever had to a Gilchrist. I mean, Dhoni became conservative early enough, and we got this, I don't know, to use a cliche term, swashbuckling wicketkeeper batsman at number 7. And we don't celebrate that enough because we've got like ineptitude on both sides of his.
So Tony slipped in that. I think I heard him slip in that Pant could be a future captain. And yes, we've talked about how good he is as a batsman and a wicketkeeper, and how improved he is, and how we should, applaud and recognize the way he plays the game, and leave the rest of it as guff that soft hands Gavaskar says. I just don't see him as captain material. If that's where you're going with the question, Tony, no way. I think it'll just ruin his formation as a cricketer. There are other captaincy options, and that might be a nice segue into talking about Kohli's.
Yeah. So before we go there, right? I think I am falling into the trap of the podcast mic effect. Just because I've got a podcast mic, I'm sounding like an expert. Whereas the only reason I watch cricket is for the joy it brings, right? So
who said you sound like an expert?
In my head, my own voice sounds great at 1.5x in my head. So yeah, but the point is, the real reason why I've enjoyed watching this cricket team, Indian cricket team, so much, and the reason why I praise Kohli so much all the time, is for the emotional aspect it brings, right? They're not trying to survive and play out, boring draws or anything like that. They want to make sure they leave it all out on the field and they go for a win, and oftentimes end up losing. But that's okay as well. That was in fact the first match as captain he played in Adelaide was basically how the rest of the thing followed, right? So for me, actually, this after day 3, I actually wrote a post which said, Virat Kohli, you broke my heart. And I was really done with Virat Kohli, because over the last 6 to 7 years, this Indian cricket team has stepped it up in terms of aggression, in terms of taking the attack to the opposition, in terms of riling up their own players and the opposition and creating chances, right? So give them 60 overs of hell, and we saw how that unfolded when England crumbled. But what happened at the end of day 3 was at the end of the other spectrum, right? Which was a complete meltdown and breakdown of everything we've seen with the Indian cricket team. I'm not sure if I sort of attribute that to Shastri holding the team together. You guys will come at me. But really, what we saw was a complete meltdown of the Indian cricket team on the field, right? Which is not something I was used to. It really took me aback as a cricket fan. And in some senses, probably it's the right time for Kohli to step away if he doesn't feel that he's got either the control of the team or the support of the backroom staff, and his batting is also going through a bad patch.
It's a really good framework that you've got there, Tony. If you go back to Calcutta 2001, right, we could say that maybe that was a start of the mentally disintegrating, and that you could say was what happened in that series. Now, was that right? Was that wrong? Was that right for Steve Waugh and his team to be really irked by Ganguly coming late to the toss and a whole bunch of other things, right?
Yes,
so the mental disintegrators mentally disintegrated. And essentially what happened here is that the siege mentality experts actually were under siege. And that's essentially what happens. And when this happens, all sorts of things go wrong. And what we saw there was appalling behavior by the team. What to me, what was even more galling was the appalling behavior of the people who control the game, who said, oh, it's okay, and they turned a blind eye to it. And I think that's terrible. Now, did that lead to, therefore, me saying, oh, Kohli, it's time for you to go? No way. No way. So that's the extension of your framework that I'm not willing to accept.
Sorry, so my point was not really about the spirit of the game, etc., that was broken on that day. It was more to the point that Srinath said it was at 60-1 when that happened. If they had gone on with their cricket and, put the siege mentality channeled it in the right direction.
But don't forget, in the very first innings, right? The same person, Kohli, who feels under that siege, got the entire dugout to use their soft hands to clap. So soft hands is important. Right?
The one thing that I think I've heard from all of you, but the one thing that none of you have mentioned is the specific aspect of what the meltdown happened on, which was on this DRS decision. See, the Indian cricket team, especially under Kohli, trying to create a siege mentality. Oh, it's because Anderson said something to Bumrah. Oh my God, now we are all under attack and they want to come out and attack. The media has said something about us, or maybe there is racial abuse. So these are all things that the Indian cricket team has used in the past in order to create a siege mentality. People saying things on the field, they have used it to create siege mentality. But to use DRS specifically, a technology which in all purposes is completely faceless and humanless, to create a siege mentality, I find that fascinating. And there are many aspects to it. We can get into the various specific aspects of the strengths and weaknesses, the DRS, etc. But my larger point is essentially this. I feel that this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't this thing. It really makes sense if you look at how DRS is viewed by India, and especially by Indian spin bowlers, specifically like Ashwin. Because for a lot of us and for the rest of the world, the reason why DRS exists is because they say, okay, the reason why DRS exists is because we want to correct howlers made by umpires. And so there is a way for you to review this decision. But that's not true in India, especially for someone like Ashwin, who used DRS all through his career. Like there are many videos and analysis that basically says that Ashwin's rise, one of the big factors of his, of course, is his skill, etc. But it's also because of DRS. If DRS existed in the era of a Kumble or a Harbhajan, it would have been a very different kettle of fish. Left-handers.
There wouldn't have been a 10-4 for Kumble to begin with.
Yes. The fall of left-handers over the last 10 years has happened completely because of DRS. So Ashwin especially has seen DRS as a weapon, just like how seam bowlers see a wobble ball, etc., etc. So for me, I think that is the mindset how they use DRS. And when something like that does not work for you, you feel like there is a grave injustice being done. And I think that is really central and quite fascinating.
And just to go back to that whole sandpaper gate and that entire series, there was a lot of analysis done post that, which these guys brought in immediately on the basis of one DRS error or decision or whatever happened there. Effectively to say that, hey, Supersport, you put in 20 camera people around the ground. You started pointing out that Darren Lehman had a walkie-talkie, and then you started, connecting the dots and caught this guy with sandpaper in his pockets. And to connect that to a DRS projection was completely silly. And like I said before, it's just like laboring the point. You didn't just connect it, but you went on about it for 30 minutes from the slips. What message are you sending to your bowlers if you say, hey, LBW and caught behind are eliminated because the DRS won't detect it? So you've just got bowled and caught in the slips or something. That was just the chant from, I think, even a baby-voiced Mayank Agarwal was doing it at one point. It became really funny. What's going to happen, right? Like, what is Bumrah and Shardul and Shami thinking when they walk back to their mark? It's just like completely silly beyond reason.
Yeah, interestingly, I think this stat bears out that this was the first test ever where 20 wickets of a team fell to catches. So South Africa didn't get a single LBW or bowled. And this is the first such test in history, right? So there's something to be said for, bowled and LBW are not going to work. So try the catches anyway.
Going back to that meltdown, I've been trying to understand why it happened. how it happened, right? It is, lots of people have said, this is very much in character. This is what Kohli always does. But I think they've also touched upon the point. This was actually not at all in character. Yeah. Whenever this team gets into the under siege mentality, it is often, they're creating internal friction to try and, project themselves against not perceived injustices, but very often real injustices to make things happen.
Exactly.
And, there's been a distinct culture shift in Indian cricket, right? This has happened over the years. It's not very long back that come to India, we'll show you happened, right? And I remember, I think after England had hammered India 4-0, right, in 2011, England went to UAE and got spun out by Pakistan on turning tracks. And I remember Indian cricketers reacted to that and said, haha, these guys are coming to India next and we'll show them, right? We'll show them on turn. And we all know what happened when England came back to India and got spun out, right? That was the mentality that the Indian team had once upon a time, right? And these are not even old cricketers you're talking about. These are people in the post-Dhoni era, the Dhoni era itself, right? That's something that Kohli and Shastri and this entire team has actually flipped, right? They're not actually hiding behind excuses. When they create friction, and Kohli is always on the edge of creating this internal friction, right? You mentioned the claps, for instance, earlier in the test match. I could go back to 2017, right? When Steve Smith was caught, trying to cheat on DRS. Kohli had a terrible series as a batsman, but he was in their face as a just as an antagonist throughout that series and putting it in their face that, they were trying to get that edge. And it actually contributed to geeing up India and winning that tough series, right? So Kohli has always been doing that. What he did here, it was so out of character that you could probably say it must have been impulsive, right? It must have just come out in the heat of the moment. Lots of things are not going your way and it's just brewing in your head and you just explode. But like Srinath mentioned, there were so many dots that these guys actually joined in their heads. They've gone back all the way to Sandpaper Saga. They know that, this broadcaster has a certain way of, creating a bias in the way they broadcast matches. So bring that out in the field and not just one person as a one-off, right? The entire team for half an hour repeatedly coming to the mic and going on and on about this. I think, at some point they thought, let us actually use this as a weapon if we can, at some point in the series, to our advantage. But it just came out entirely the wrong way at the wrong moment. And they actually lost the plot in that 30 minutes.
Yeah, which is why, Nitin, I come here and agree with almost, in fact, everything that you said, except the word impulsive. There was nothing about it in my mind that was impulsive. The retort, but the way, the manner in which they retorted meant that they had cogitated this for a long time, and the catalyst that was required brought out exactly everyone was saying more or less the same thing. So it wasn't impulsive. It was cogitated. It was thought through. It was actually felt by every player that they were being singled out. Not just them. There may be whispers in the cricketing world itself, because they brought to the table sandpaper gear. They were not part of it at all, right? So that tells me that this wasn't impulsive. They'd actually felt it. They'd actually talked about it, and then brought it out in the open in the worst possible way.
There's ripples around the cricketing world, Mohan. I was watching the Fox Sports coverage this morning, and Gilchrist is now the host, and by many accounts, the calmest of the current Aussie commentating lot, right? Like he was mentioning about 3 decisions that went against England, which were overturned by DRS. That there was none of them this morning. They said, like, thank heavens none of them went to the stump mic and blamed Fox Sports producers for it. That's the impact instantly.
No, so 2 parts to this, right? One is I think most people have forgotten, but in the first innings when Kohli was on 39, there was an appeal for caught behind. There was a spike on Snicko. The South African team started celebrating, and Palekar, the third umpire, actually said, there is a spike, but I can see a gap between bat and ball, which not many of us saw. And he actually overturned it, right? So it's not like it's been a series of misfortunate things that have happened, which is why I want to tease out the 2 parts to this, right? And move on to the captaincy discussion.
Before you do that, Tony, are you saying Palekar ne golmaal kiya?
Whoa.
Well done.
He's been holding that line for a long time.
So what was brought up during this conversation was Mayank's dismissal, right? Some LBW that happened, which again the projection seemed weird, which they brought in during this Dean Elgar dismissal as well, which is why I think the backroom staff deserves slaps on their backside, where they are the ones who are supposed to sit down players and explain how DRS works, or at least understand how DRS works and translate it to them and say this is not a aberration, right? This is how DR is supposed to function. If we are not okay with that, then there is a different problem. But it doesn't go to the umpires or the broadcasters being biased exclusively against India to produce a result, right? And I lay the blame at the backroom staff's feet or backsides, or however you want to call it. And then
just because Shastri is not there.
No. I mean, these things continue to happen in cricket, right? It's about
I tend to agree that I think that there is something here. There is something here that we don't know. There is something here that has happened that they have discussed probably over the series, which I tend to agree with Nitin that it just kind of exploded over here. You can see how it's not impulsive at all. Like the review is done. The review is just gone. Ashwin immediately loses it on one stump mic. He's yelling on one stump mic. Kohli is yelling on the other stump mic. So you know that something is up here. They have been talking about it. They have been simmering over this for a while. But I don't know why. But maybe somebody told them. Maybe they were sitting in the staff and they were looking at the coverage and the way how SuperSport was covering and keeping a focus on the ball when the Indians were bowling, but not doing the same when South Africa were bowling. Maybe they had some reason to think that, look, there is something off with the ball, but there was no reverse swing really. So I don't really know what exactly it was, but it's clear that there is something was simmering.
Yeah, there was also the other incident that happened this series, right? Which is when one of the South Africans got dismissed and he didn't take a DRS, and it happened, and then it got to lunch, and then SuperSport showed the replay in which there was no nick or whatever, and then there was an appeal made to the team in between, right? So, and I think at a later point in time, there was another appeal by the Indian team when Shardul was bowling, and they didn't go for the DRS. But then Kohli walked up to the stump mic and say, show me that replay. I know you can hear me, right? To say that you guys are selectively showing replays to insinuate something, etc. But my whole point is that this needs to be dealt with not on the cricket field, right? If you have an issue with the broadcasters, take it up with the board or whoever is handling those broadcasts.
Just to finish that thought, also what Bumrah said into the stump mic at the end of the second test, where he said, I know you're hearing this, we'll come back pretty strong in the third. That takes a whole different meaning in the aftermath of this.
But going back to Tony's point, you said, the boards need to look into it and look at broadcasters and their responsibilities and roles and perceived unbiasedness, if you like. I still go back to the point I made. I'm appalled that ICC said all of that was okay. I think a clear signal needs to be sent that that's not okay. We're sitting here.
Sorry, the ICC said all that was okay because there is nothing in the ICC book that says that you can penalize people for saying stuff against broadcast. It doesn't exist. What will you charge them with? You have to use something really broad, like bringing the game to disrepute or something.
Correct.
Like that.
Exactly right.
ICC conducted a fantastic test match. Every over was bowled on time, right? Over rates were spectacular. It's the only thing that matters. ICC was sitting with their calculators and clocks. They're not listening to what's coming in the stump mic. They're not listening to the commentary. All of that doesn't count for anything. That's all jack shit. The only thing that matters is the series is over, guys. It ended on time. It's one thing to go and talk against a broadcaster. It's another thing to choose the wrong broadcaster. Why can't they go and badmouth Sony Live? The worst app in the world. Right? Why are they going after SuperSport?
I just want to see how far you can stretch this. Like in future tests or these things in India, will people go up to the stump mic and start abusing cred? I would love to see that happen. This is like Paytm. I didn't get my cash back. What can you do? There is nothing in the ICC rules that say that you have to charge people.
Social media doesn't work anymore, so let's use the stump
PGK,
mic to get our message.
This has happened in the.
This has happened. This has actually
exact
happened.
thing has happened in the 2000s when Gilchrist and co. They started naming the rivals of Travelex, who was the sponsor, and so on.
I remember that story.
So the funny part about when Nitin said the test match and series ended on time was a producer for this episode, Srinath, suddenly took a look at the timeline and saw we've been going on for over an hour. Then he quietly face-palmed himself. Then he emerged from that face-palm to say, no problem, I will fix it in post.
No, I have a question on that DRS call, right? It obviously looked strange to all of us, right? When we looked at the front-on view, it looked like obviously it hit fairly low and that we were all convinced that it's going to be out, obviously. So it was surprising when we saw the ball going over the stumps. But at least in my case, when I saw the side view of the same ball, right? The side on you, where you see the ball's trajectory, it bounces and it goes up. It seemed perfectly fine to me. I don't know why we are, forget the Indian team, obviously, in the spur of the moment or whatever, with the built-up thing, reacting the way they did. But I think it was a perfectly fine call. The technology worked perfectly. Like, did any of us have problems with it?
Sorry, and it's so weird because this has been DRS has been around for like 12, 13 years. This is not like, I remember when DRS came initially, there was a lot of suspicion by especially Tendulkar and the BCCI and looking at this and saying, this thing, I'm not so sure. It looks a little bit weird. It looks a little bit bad. And I get it because you are people who have never seen this and you are looking at this and saying, can this be weaponized against us? These guys have probably been growing up. They must have done most of their career in DRS. And like I said, in the case of Ashwin, probably like even his career has probably owes a lot to DRS as well. And to look at this whole thing and say, oh yes, this is all against us seems a little strange. Very much like old man yelling at clouds kind of situation.
To be fair to Ashwin, he did take 2 important wickets in this series, all told, of Ngidi and Rabada.
No, he took Peterson as well. Come on, you can't do that. He took Peterson.
What, really?
And Elgar, according
yes, he
to
did
him.
in the second test. In the second test, he took Peterson.
Captaincy, right? It's interesting. Kohli is obviously out. There are rumors that KL Rahul will be captain, but at this point in time, I just want to bring out what our dear friend Kaustubh at _cows on Instagram said about KL Rahul. He's got the look of someone who's high on edibles and is constantly worried that someone is going to find out that he's consumed these edibles, right? That's the appearance he gives on the field. To me, I don't think he's got a single bone of captaincy in him, which is why I said Pant and also the evolution of his wicket-keeping and batting over the last 3 years.
Let's look at this, right? A year ago, KL Rahul wasn't a certainty in the team. That's how bad it is. So there's no way you can be absolutely sure that KL Rahul should be the captain, unless you can be sure that he will be in every single team. Yes, currently he's doing well, but when Rohit Sharma comes back and you have Shubman Gill, and you have Mayank Agarwal there and KL Rahul, what's going to happen? So we're not even sure whether KL Rahul will find a place in the team. So why are we even thinking of him as captain? So that's one. So then, therefore, what are the options? You mentioned Pant, and I think it'll be a disaster for him as well as India if he's captain. So not because he cannot captain, but simply because I think he's just too young, and with the wicket-keeping responsibilities and a whole bunch of other things, I'm not sure he's up for it. How much as I hate myself for saying this, perhaps Rohit Sharma is the best option. If not, I would give it to a young player like South Africa did when they anointed Graham Smith, a young player who is going to be there for the long haul. The Graham Smith option was a fantastic one by South Africa. It's a huge risk, and it paid off massively for them over, if I remember right, a 10-year period. They had options, but they went for they had some really good options. They went for Graham Smith. So I would go for something like that rather than KL Rahul or Rohit Sharma outbound.
I think we need to put some context to this, right? To say, in fact, Kohli has stepped out at the perfect time for the team to have a lead in before the next round of major tours. Because the next few series that India are going to face is Sri Lanka at home for 2 tests, Bangladesh away. In between, there is Australia at home for 4 tests. But practically, India is playing at home for the foreseeable future, right? And there's a one-off test against England or whatever. And it doesn't matter who is going to be captain in India because we have riches by whatever, right? And I'm pretty sure the pitches are also going to reflect our need to win and dominate these teams coming. Yeah, it's going to be that, right? So it means that Rohit Sharma is going to be the safe choice, right? He's going to be the safe choice if you want to say, we bounce back from this and we won all these test matches. Now what, right? And then you go away and the same cycle repeats because let's face it, Rohit Sharma is not the fittest man on the planet. He's not going to be around as long as Kohli will be even, right? So you need to look at who is going to be the next long-term captain. I think that's the context in which this is set up. But of course, Rohit Sharma can also turn it on and become the next Ross Taylor.
Here's what I think the team is thinking, okay, which is essentially, look, we can talk about all of this. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, we know that there are only 3 players in the current Indian team who are a certainty across conditions in tests across countries. And those 3 players right now are Rohit Sharma, Rishabh Pant and Jasprit Bumrah. That's it. Everyone else, you have No idea. Someone fits in here, someone fits in there.
You're counting Kohli
Not
out,
sure
is
what's
it?
going to happen. Well, of course, I'm counting Kohli out now that Kohli is no longer going to be an option, right?
Cool.
I think the team's thinking is essentially this. I mean, probably if there is a thinking, is that, okay, look, let's make Rohit Sharma captain maybe for a year or two. Please stick around for a year or two. We'll tolerate you. It's exactly like the Kumble thing, although Kumble was not tolerated, but then that particular time was very important. And hopefully in this 2-year period, they will probably get in the Shubman Gills, the Shreyas Iyer into the teams and hope that they are able to like establish themselves as certainties in the squad. And if they do, I think there's a pretty good chance that they will pass it on to either a Gill or an Iyer. I don't think it's going to be Pant.
I'm actually amused that Rahul is even an option, right? Like some of you guys mentioned. Suddenly there are so many loud calls for him to be made captain and he's jumped ahead of the queue. In a way, you could say he's Mundeba Lauda right now. The thing is, yeah, I definitely feel Rohit Sharma is the right person to be made the captain right now. Yes, he's a little old. Yes, he's not the fittest kid on the block. But the guy has just established himself in the test squad, right? And I'm sure he's very ambitious. He does want to make a mark in test cricket. So he's going to be around for a while, for sure, right? And he's not, I mean, come on, we had Ganguly as captain once upon a time. Since when is fitness of captains, important to Indian cricket? So I feel definitely there are 2 or 3 years here of Rohit Sharma. And it's a good time to try and groom the next year. And I don't think that's KL Rahul, like someone else mentioned, right? There's not a single bone of captaincy in KL Rahul. He has pretty much abused his position as captain of Kings 11 Punjab to further his own sort of cause and to come back into the India team, right? He has batted in a certain way to make sure he's on the selector's radar. And that's why he's now back in the team. Anyone who's going to put his own batting ahead of his team the way KL Rahul has over the last 2 or 3 years is not captaincy material. And I think we also saw that he was a little short of ideas in the second test match, right? So not the greatest option. I like the idea of Shubman Gill. Long way to go. To start with, has to become, a fixture at least in one format though, and then hopefully another one. The only person or the only people I would say who tick the box at the moment are actually Bumrah and Rishabh Pant, right? Bumrah seems very left field. We've not had a fast bowling captain in Indian cricket since the days of Kapil Dev. And especially with, the amount of cricket that's played, injuries, rest, and all of that, I don't see Bumrah becoming captain. I think almost by default, Rishabh Pant has to be the person who is groomed for the role. But
why not
going
Shardul
back to
Wow. That was very smooth segue from Kapil there. Very good.
The Lord and the cap. The only exception to that rule is actually Dhoni, if you think about it, right? Dhoni was a flashy player who played by his own rules. Again, it was a bit of a default choice. There was nobody else at that point because that entire batch had sort of tried and moved on, right? But the good thing for Dhoni was, at least in Test cricket, he had a period of apprenticeship under Kumble. But as far as limited overs cricket goes, he was, pretty much thrown into the deep end. The difficult thing with Rohit is going to be that he's going to get all 3 formats at one shot, which is not true even for Kohli. Kohli also had, the chance to move into Test cricket, as it were.
Yeah. The other thing though is if Rohit Sharma becomes captain, then it automatically by default, if you assume the Iyer and the Gill succession, then it obviously means that Pujara and Rahane are out. You cannot have a scenario where Rohit is the captain and you're keeping Pujara, Rahane in the team.
Wait.
Then
Pujara and Rahane are not out yet. After this shambolic series, we're still considering this.
I was always thinking that they may phase it out, keep one, lose one, but now I feel like I don't.
No, but there is a Sri Lanka series to bid them goodbye and farewell, give them 2 tests and say bye bye, tata, thank you very much. But also, which means Vihari makes his way into the team, and why can't Vihari be captain?
Because he's going to be playing Ireland A to warm up for the next series.
I think 2 of you guys are going to be watching Pujara make 100 in Bangalore and waxing lyrical about why he's the long-term number 3 or whatever. That's how this ends, right?
Class is permanent.
This entire tour actually reminds me of Royal Rumble in WWF or WWE. Right? So you have Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, Ajinkya Rahane, Cheteshwar Pujara, the 4 batsmen who sort of came together in that batch, right? In a sense, Rohit had the slowest start because the other 3 sort of got established as the bulwark of the Indian middle order. Kohli obviously went on to become a superstar. Rohit has then sort of, found an alternative route into the team, becoming an opener and all of that. what has happened on this tour, right? And what happens in Royal Rumble is you need to throw your opponents out, right? The last person standing in the ring actually wins Royal Rumble. It's that format where 100 people are in the ring. Rohit Sharma has, quietly stayed out of this entire mess. These other three guys have come to South Africa and they've all sort of slipped on banana peels, sort of been knocked out by the board. They're all out of the ring now. And Rohit Sharma is like, okay, where did everyone go? I'm the new captain. I'm the only one left standing.
Right, but I think one thing that we haven't done so far is that we've got probably the most spectacular captain of Indian cricket team, who's actually changed the way the team plays, calling it quits as captain. I think it's only fair
Dhoni retired
from CSK. But I think it's only fair that we go around the table and probably get quick thoughts on Kohli. Maybe even your favorite moment watching Kohli in the field as captain. I think we've all been privileged to see it. And anyone who's seen Kohli captaining while in the stadium, will probably hold him in the highest regard as opposed to someone who's not had the chance to see him. At least that's my view.
I don't have a particular moment, but I think there's a couple of things worth saying about Kohli, which will stand with me for as long as I watch cricket, right? Like everyone spouts the cliches. Everyone says Test cricket is the highest and we regard it right up the top. Everyone says you need to focus on fitness and groom bowlers. Here's a guy who's walked the talk for 8 years, and I've never always been the strongest of his backers, as some of you know. All of us are not elite athletes for a reason, because we don't listen to the cliche about processes and putting them in place over a period of time. And now post facto, you look at the record, they've won pretty much everywhere they've gone, except for probably New Zealand so far. And that's the strongest legacy. I mean, the whole burden of responsibility on the next guy to continue to keep up even some of this, even the fitness focus, even the 5-bowler theory, just that mental strength to adhere to what he thinks was right and stand by it, even when the team is losing and even when the chips are down. Winning at home has now become something we take for granted. But in 2013, we hadn't won in Sri Lanka for 20 years. That's where this started. And we were calling RP Singh from a holiday in Miami to bowl in England. And the guy was bowling, spraying it all over the place. That's where this started from. And this is where he's leaving the team. And that's, I think, my strongest memory of Kohli long into the future.
Great one. I think what a lot of us don't remember about Kohli is where he started, right? We all know about the guy who's become a fitness freak and who has changed sort of the fitness culture in Indian cricket, right? Which is all great. But we should remember that Kohli himself wasn't, a super fit guy when he started. He used to like all the good stuff, right? And there was a period in his career, I think, after he had 1 or 2 IPLs where he did not do well or something, where there was a self-realization that kicked in. And he said, okay, if I really want to become and realize the fullness of my potential, I need to change, physically. I need to change as a person. I need to get more disciplined and fit. So he first walked that talk, and he's been walking that talk throughout, right? And then he became captain. Then he instituted, certain fitness level standards that are required in Indian cricket. You could say that, all of this happened because the NCA is around. We have great, feeder systems, fitness focus in the country has definitely gone up in the last few years and all of it. But all of this was equally true for the previous dispensation, right? Where you had Dhoni and Srinivasan in charge. Why did those changes not happen then? There's a reason why it's happened under Virat Kohli, right? And again, just talking about Srinivasan and Dhoni, right? You mentioned RP Singh coming out of nowhere and spraying the ball at the oval. In that same year, India refused to go for a win against a really weak West Indian team in Dominica, right? Mm-hmm. They chose to back out of a chase with 1 hour to go. I think you still had Dravid and Lakshman. So you had very decent batsmen still at the crease, right?
15 overs, 80 or 60 something to win, something like that. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's how much this team cared about Test cricket, right? They cared about coming back, saving their face, not losing. This team right now doesn't have a single negative bone in its body. And we saw that happen at the Gabba. I know Kohli was not there, but that culture of going for a win at any point in the game, right from that Adelaide Test match, the first Test match where Kohli was captain, he is playing to win every single ball. That is the legacy. And I don't know if, I hope it carries on, but it'll take another really charismatic leader at the top to keep that spirit going.
The most enduring moment for me was his first Test as captain, where, or not the first, but the Adelaide Test, where he set the blueprint for how this team is going to play. Should they have gone for the win? Who knows? Dhoni may not have Dravid may not have, but he did.
He definitely would not have. It's not
Well,
say may not have.
right. I was just being a bit polite there, but I think the he did, and he says this is how we're going to play the game. That's one. The other thing that he's really proud of is the legacy that he leaves behind. And in a recent interview, I think it was with Dinesh Karthik, he says, I have no problems leaving the team at any point in time. In my own view, he probably left the team a bit too soon. And you could probably see it coming from the England series, where that final test had to be given up for some silly tournament in the Middle East. But I had to slip it in. But you could see his legacy. His legacy is what he cares about most. And once that had been tampered with, I think he just lost steam and says, screw it. I'm not gonna really worry about this. But in the interview with Dinesh Karthik, he says, I can walk away from the game at any point in time because I know that the team is in a good place. I know that these people will leave their blood and sweat on the field. And that's the culture that he's brought into the team. So yes, fitness is one aspect of it, but there's much more. Fitness, diet, the bloody-mindedness, the fight, the grit, the determination, everything he's brought into this team. And that I think is going to be his legacy.
If you ever get a chance, you should watch this interview of Virat Kohli done by this guy called Graham something, who's an American. And he does this multi-part interview with Virat Kohli where he's just talking to him about what was your childhood like? What was it like when you lost your father? So it was very important milestones in his life. And I really recommend going and watching the interview because there are parts of it that reveal, and you can see that, of course, there was a certain amount of PR associated with that interview, but still, there are some really authentic moments in there. And Nitin covered this. So there's a story that he tells about how he was basically like, while playing the IPL, he would eat everything from the mini bar, like all these biscuits and everything. And one day he woke up and he had like crumbs all over him. And he looks in front of the mirror and says that this is not the body of an elite athlete. And I have to change what I have to do. And there are other stories that journalists say, like when they just started off and they go and visit Shastri and they ask Shastri, where's the team? And he says that the team is in the gym. He's like, where is Virat? He's like, obviously he's in the gym, because if Virat is in the gym, what do you think the team is going to do? They're going to stay in the gym as long as he's there. So these aspects, of course, are something that everyone knows of. But there are also other aspects, like how whenever like India tour Australia, the focus of the entire media and attention is completely on Virat. That is why this time, the last series that went on, everybody lost their minds in Australia because the character of India is Virat, and he absorbs that and he creates that and he uses and channelizes all of it and pushes it into a team. And I don't think we really understood what he did or how he did that. And I don't think he's the kind of person who wants to do it because he's such a big extrovert and he's a flashy, flamboyant person. He's not a Cristiano Ronaldo. He's not that kind of a person. He's doing all of those things. There is a certain method to it. He's doing it to absorb some of the attention, to take it all away and to channelize it. And apart from, we've spoken about his focus on test match, we've spoken his focus on fitness, and all of these are probably going to be his greatest enduring legacies. But I will also say the most important thing for me, apart from these two things, is the ability for an Indian captain to speak and to speak out the way we expect the captain of a cricket team to speak out. He spoke out when whatever happened against Mohammad Shami. And he didn't speak out under compulsion. He did not say, okay, I guess I have to release this statement as a tweet. I'm going to do this. No, he said it in a press conference. Someone interrupts him. The manager says, no, you don't have to say this. And he says, no, I want to make a statement. And these are all things that he did not need to do, but he did anyway. And I feel like for over like 20, 30 years, you can look at the list of captains that have captained India, and I don't think any of them did this or were in a position to do this. So for all of those things, miss you, Kohli, hashtag.
Beautiful. I think I've not much to add, but I think Kohli is probably the most misunderstood and mischaracterized sports persons that ever existed. Most people call Kohli arrogant, but to me, he's the most humble athlete I've ever seen, right? So there was an interview of Kohli when he was at peak form in T20, where someone asked him about, how you can keep this going. And he said, I don't have the natural talent of a Rohit Sharma to be able to hit sixes. So I need to keep my body fit enough to convert twos into threes, right? It's not a cliche like Sunil Gavaskar says it, but he knows very well what his limitations are, right? And what are the kind of giants he plays around. The second part is he replaced Dhoni as captain very suddenly, right? Probably even mysteriously, that you would have thought that if it was any other two sports person, there would be a lot of bad blood between them. But I think Kohli carried Dhoni through to the 2019 World Cup. And when Dhoni hit that six and Kohli was at the other end, in wide-eyed wonder, right? You could see that on his face. You can't fake any of that. And Kohli remains the most humble student of the game, looking at people from around the world and appreciating them. In fact, in the 2019 World Cup was the Steve Smith incident when he was just back and the crowd was booing Steve Smith, and Kohli's like, what the hell are you guys doing, right? I mean, we are playing against them, but Steve Smith is a great player of the game. He deserves appreciation. He spent his time out. Now he's back. Don't boo him. Appreciate him, right? And you can see that in the farewell notes that people have written. Whether it's Ishant Sharma, who's written a beautiful note, which you wouldn't expect, or lots of Pakistani players or anyone around the world, right? Kohli was a true ambassador of the game, a true sportsman. And I think it needs to be said, probably the most humble sports person who's achieved the maximum extent of the talents that he's been given. So, yeah, and all things said, that will make a good player. What makes him a great captain is that he takes this cheerleading mentality and uses the crowd in his favor, right? So whenever I've seen a match in which Kohli's been there, he's the one instigating chants from the crowd. He's the one pointing to the India jersey and saying, shout India, India. He's the one showing Shivam Dubey and asking them to shout for Shivam Dubey when he's running in. So that's what makes Kohli's captaincy special, right? That he's able to take his real excitement for the game, the cheerleading part of it, and get the crowd involved and make sure that it is one country playing against 11 men, right? So I think that's going to be Kohli's enduring legacy. Cool. I think we've gone on for long enough, but I just wanted to say the last time I put down Cameron Green very badly, and right now he's proving me wrong in the best possible manner. Last time we also said India is going to bounce back, and how, and they've gone and lost a series. So if you want,
basically what this means is KL Rahul is going to captain India to a series win in Australia and another. Okay, cool. All right.
Only we said Indian team will bounce back, and how the ball that Ashwin bowled to Elgar bounced and
the interview that PGK spoke out about, we will link from the show notes so all of us can listen to it. It's been a great second episode of Bits and Pieces. We are still learning, and I think we are in it for the long haul. We are willing to respect the process, but thanks to all of you for listening in. Please, share this with your friends if you think they'll enjoy it. And next week, we'll definitely have a different panel, and going on, we'll probably change and evolve how the show goes on as well. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, and till next Sunday. Bye-bye.
One closing recommendation for our listeners, right? I know all of India is pretty sad right now. Kohli is gone. We lost the series and all of that. But Sony Live has a wonderful documentary about India's famous win in Australia last year. Again, I must say that Sony Live is not sponsoring us. I wonder why. Maybe because we made fun of them some time back, and we made fun of them the last episode as well. But yeah, I'm sure this is a good documentary. It's a good way to drown your sorrows. So yeah, definitely do enjoy it.
The show notes. Check it out. Bye.
Yeah, say once more.
Over high notes in the show notes. Bye.
Oval highlights in the show notes. Check it out.
Oh.
Bye.
Oval high notes in the so he's put oval compostins in the notes.
Okay.
Oval highlights in the show notes. Check it out. Bye.